about how much time we have left, but I'm hoping that what we can do maybe together here for the next few minutes is discuss what this means today, how this affects us today. We just saw an historical example of an exposition, a sermon given on the subject of Romans 13, and what it properly means, and certain interpretations of it, Mayhew was calling shocking, delirious. When a ruler becomes delirious, that is to say, when he stops being a minister of God, he isn't supposed to be blindly followed. He's supposed to be resisted. Now, David also happens to be my pastor. This is Pastor David Whitney. He's not Jonathan Mayhew. But Pastor David Whitney is my pastor. This morning, in the beginning of his sermon, he talked about something that is afoot today with regard to Romans 13. I'm going to ask him if he'll just tell you about that.
Thank you, Michael. How many of you have heard?
There we go.
How many of you have heard of the FEMA clergy response teams?
What?
That is, FEMA has gone out and recruited pastors in 1,300 counties. That's about a third of the counties in America. Recruited pastors who are being trained specifically to tell their people that when the government says give up your guns, it is your duty. Romans 13 tells you give up your guns. Or when the government says we want to relocate you to here, the FEMA, I should call it what it is, concentration camp. You should obey the government and relocate to the FEMA concentration camp. Thousands of pastors, last I saw was 5,000, I believe the number is larger than that. That is horrific. But do you know with Obamacare, they're doing exactly the same thing? They have it called health care from the pulpit. They're recruiting pastors across America who are going to preach to their people. You need to sign up for the health care. You need to be part of Obama's death care plan. It shouldn't be called health care, Obama's death care plan. And there are hundreds of pastors signing up. One pastor in Mississippi has received a grant from the federal government of $317,000, more than that actually, so that he can sweep across the entire state of Mississippi in every church in Mississippi and get every pulpit in Mississippi to exhort their people to comply with the so-called law, it's really an unlaw, of Obama's death care plan. This is happening in America today. And what an irony this is. Because aren't pastors told in the pulpits of America today, you dare not say anything political. In fact, if a church is a 501c3, and we do have a resource if you want to do further study on the 501c3 question, they're told as a 501c3 church you cannot say anything from the pulpit regarding any piece of legislation because the agreement you sign, your church signs in a 501c3 says we will not advance or inhibit any piece of legislation. And so you cannot preach against Obamacare or death care. You cannot say you ought to contact your congressman or senator. You ought to oppose this. You can't do that if you're a 501c3. Oh, but once it becomes law, then what's the civil government say? We want you to promote this. We want you to tell your people to comply with this. We want you to be our most effective arm because they recognize pastors are some of the most trusted people in the community. If they gave this job to used car salesmen, wouldn't work very well, would it, right? They know that pastors are their best tool, and they've been using pastors in our land. Oh, yes, it's an insult to put those two together. And so we have a situation in America today where most pastors are unwilling from the pulpit to say anything political for two reasons. First, if they're a 501c3 and they understand the rules that they've signed up for, they can't do it. Secondly, their measure of success is the 3 B's, and they recognize if they step on anybody's toes, the 3 B's that measure their success are not going to be there. Bricks, bodies, and bucks. And that's what they're really about. So most churches in America have become complicit or actually promoters of tyranny in our land. Instead of exhorting their people to resist tyranny, they're telling people to comply with the tyrant, do what the tyrant says. In other words, they're not part of the solution. They're not part of returning to a biblical foundation of law and government at all. They're actually part of the problem.
May I pick up on a point that you made there, because I want to refer back again to these 4 walls that we talked about. Okay. David talked about 501c3, and by the way, he does have it back here. He gave an excellent talk, there's a DVD back here about why churches can't be corporations, why churches can't be 501c3s. And I just want to pick up on that point briefly. That is because a proper understanding of separation of church and state would prevent it, would it not? Think about this a minute. Not the perverted understanding we talk, but the proper understanding is that the church has a jurisdiction and the civil government has a jurisdiction. When the church goes and becomes a corporation, what it's doing is going down the street to Caesar's castle. It's knocking on the door and saying, will you protect me? Bring me into your castle and give me your protection. Well, there are strings attached to that lord-vassal relationship, are there not? Once you go into Caesar's gates and he gives you protection, you owe him loyalty, you owe him fealty. So I know that churches are afraid to lose some kind of tax exemption, but properly understood, they're tax immune. They're in a different jurisdiction. The civil government has no authority over the church. God has authority over both. Remember, the arrow's coming down through both walls. But the civil government doesn't have any authority over the church unless the church goes down to the civil government, down to the castle, knocks on the door, and says, please let me in, and would you protect me from liability if anybody slips and falls in my parking lot, or some such thing, and seeks some kind of protection from the civil government. Now, by contract, there is a relationship. That contractual relationship is, I would suggest, an unrighteous thing, an unbiblical thing, an unchurch-like thing for the church to do. Remember, the head of any corporation is the state. The head of any corporation is the state. The assets to any corporation, technically, well, they might be administered by a board of directors, but they're owned by the state. The head of the church is who? Jesus Christ. So if you've got a headship problem when a church walks in and says, please protect me. They already are protected, and they should rely upon that protection. So David also made one other point that I want to pick up on, if you don't mind, and then we'll take questions. Is that okay? When we talk about law, David made a comment. He said unlaw. He called, I think, Obamacare unlaw. Remember this document we held up a little while ago in the Declaration of Independence? One of the things on one of those yellow pages, when what they called these things that Parliament was doing and the king was doing that were unrighteous, they called them pretended legislation, which I think is a wonderful term, and it's historic. It's in the Declaration. This is pretended legislation. Folks, today, that's what Obamacare is. And many, many other things are pretended legislation. And by the way, what did our founders of the Declaration call it when somebody was accused of violating pretended legislation? They called it pretended offenses. Pretended offenses and pretend. So when we say law or unlaw, in the words of our founders, we're talking about pretended legislation. Now, it's everywhere, and we should recognize it. And here's how you recognize pretended legislation. Real law has to meet two tests. Think of me, I don't have it with me, but I usually carry a yardstick, a ruler, and I have in my hand the Holy Bible. This is yardstick number one. It has to meet this test. Nothing can be law, and Blackstone explained this. He said, if it's out of harmony with the divine law, it's not law. It might look like law and smell like law. You might get punished for a pretended offense. But it's not the law. The second standard, that's an eternal standard that applies to everything. So let's just stay with Obamacare for a minute. Does God give, in His Word, the authority to the civil government back there on that wall to regulate health care? No. To provide health care? No. So you don't have to go to the second standard. It's already pretended legislation. But let's go to the second standard just for fun. The second standard, this book has the Maryland Constitution, it also has the United States Constitution. What I'm suggesting I'm holding up for you is the United States Constitution. Article 1 and Section 8 lists the 18 things that the Congress is authorized to tax and spend your money for. If it's not on that list, they don't have the authority. The 10th Amendment puts like the exclamation point on that, right? It's not here, they don't have it. So healthcare is not one of those, the financing of healthcare is not one of those things listed in Article 1, Section 8. So if I had the ruler with me, I'd say the ruler goes in here. If it doesn't meet that test, it's not law. Also, if it doesn't meet this test, it's not law. Well, Obamacare, as a matter of fact, anything that the federal government would seek to enforce that had to do with the financing and delivery of health care doesn't meet either standard. So we should stop calling, but they say all the time, do they not, that it was signed into law? They say it's the law of the land? Whatever that 3,200-page thing is, it ain't law. For the reasons that I just described.
That's right.
Right? This is not law. And we should remember not to call these things law. And I'm just suggesting to you all here present that we could use the words of our founders and call it pretended legislation. We would all understand what that meant. And it has an historic backing. Pastor, there was something else you
I gave each of you a copy from Leviticus chapter 25, specifically verses 25 through 34. I won't take time to read this. I encourage you to read it on your own. Let me make the point that it makes. Property ownership belongs in not church government, not civil government. It belongs in the realm of family government. That's why it can never be permanently alienated from the family. God gave it to the family, and nobody else can take it from the family. Therefore, when the civil government taxes the family property, the civil government is violating God's law. Because what will happen if you don't pay that property tax? What happens? You don't pay that property tax? They come and steal the property that God has given to you. We have an ungodly system. Property tax is an ungodly system. Where does most of the money for property tax go? In my county, it's more than $1 billion a year of property tax money is spent to miseducate, to indoctrinate the children who are subject to the compulsory education laws and so on. So it doubles the evil. Civil government invading the family property, stealing from the family properties. Civil government stealing the children from the family to propagandize them in their system. All of that is evil. And all of that should be undone. Why is it not undone? Because Christians throughout our country have allowed this to happen and have not understood that God's law demands that this is an ungodly system that we ought to be working effectively to change.
If your pastor, if you don't hear what you just heard here in church, and you should, then find a church where you hear this. I have to go to a church where I hear it. I'm blessed that way. There are many churches out there who are telling people to go to the FEMA camp when they're told to. So I would say they're not churches. There are many things out there that call themselves churches, but they're corporations. Their head is the state. And sooner or later, that headship problem is going to emerge, and probably sooner, right? So we heard about a church here tonight that's got independence in its title, right? That preaches these things. I happen to go to one in Pasadena, Maryland, that preaches these things. Many seminaries have trained up pastors to submit to this worldview. It's a big problem. By the way, lawyers in law school are not trained in that view. They're trained in this view. They're trained in law changes. They're not trained like Patrick Henry and like George Mason and like Thomas Jefferson. They're not trained like our founders. We're trained in a revolutionary idea of law. And please remember that everything that we're talking about, everything that Pastor talked about, everything that Mayhew was talking about, what we teach in our course, we are called out here in the world, we're called revolutionaries. We're called all kinds of names. We see ourselves like our founders saw themselves. We are restorers. We're not talking about anything new. We're talking about old stuff that needs to be remembered and restore. So when you walk out of here and you talk about these things, you learn these things, you articulate these things, you will be attacked. But Jesus Christ himself told you that that was going to happen, didn't he? Didn't he warn you? He said, if they do this to the master, what are they going to do to the servant? So please, arm yourself with the knowledge, the content, with the worldview. Arm yourself every Sunday. Excuse me, every day, every minute. Take all thoughts captive. But I mean, put yourself in a community where you are being fed the truth and a steady diet of the truth. Please do that. Pastor, do we have any time left at all? Are we over time? Can we take some questions?
Yeah.
We'd be happy to do that.
If the FEMA pastors are being brought together, obviously by the government, is anyone doing anything to bring pastors together to come out from under the 501c3 or pastors to come together to walk in resistance to this?
Yes, there are.
Repeat the question.
The question is, thank you. The FEMA and the clergy response team is working to gather pastors who are in the pagan government worldview. Yes, there are some pastors. Well, I could recommend to you, if you know someone around the country who's looking for such a church, as Michael's described, Pastor Chuck Baldwin, in his website, chuckbaldwinlive.com, has what he calls a Black Robe Regiment, a modern Black Robe Regiment of pastors. That is, pastors who believe these principles and are preaching these things, applying them, and there's a list there from each of the states in the Union. Not as anywhere near as long a list as it should be, but nonetheless, that's a start. What we are doing at Institute on the Constitution is helping pastors understand this biblical worldview in regards to law and government, because I can guarantee you, having gone through seminary and knowing many other people who graduated from seminary, you'll never hear this taught in the seminary classroom. So we're helping pastors across the country to become equipped with this biblical understanding of law and government, a teaching that they have not gotten elsewhere. And so we're trying to work with a circle of pastors. I know here in Pennsylvania, Sam Rohrer, who was formerly a representative here, he's working with a pastors network, and I understand he's trying to make that a nationwide network, not just here in Pennsylvania, but of patriot pastors who understand these principles. So those are some that I'm aware of. Michael, are you?
I was going to mention Chuck Baldwin.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a pastor right here.
Yes.
Where physically is your church?
It's about halfway between Lancaster and Reading.
Does everybody here know this church? You have, okay. Are you all from this church?
But most are. About halfway between Lancaster and Reading. At this point, we meet in a fire hall, and I'm not sure how long we'll continue to meet in a fire hall, but right now that's where we meet. Been meeting now for about a month. Resisted the idea of starting a church for a long time, but after a while you don't have a place to go, and you keep on hearing nonsense every Sunday. You have to deprogram yourself,
Yes.
and we decided to put an end to it.
Amen.
I think I tried to find your church this morning.
Uh-oh.
I was in Terry Hill, 5.0. Where's it at?
That is correct.
It's right on the flyer here.
There's. It pains me to say this. There's 5 Sundays out of the entire year that the fire hall will not give us the property.
Yeah.
We did have it on our website, but if you don't know the website, how are you going to know? This morning was one of those 5 Sundays.
Where is it?
It's in the 5 Pointville Fire Company, Fire Hall.
I was there this morning in the parking lot, looking all over the place. I have a question.
It'll be there next Sunday, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
we will. We will be there next
Next
Sunday.
Sunday, they weren't there this Sunday, but they'll be there next Sunday.
9 a.m.
I have a question. Speaking about churches not willing to, I've been in many churches and no church will give me a chance because I'm going against the county government. I've written a proposal for family law. In fact, I've written a book. My daughter's gone through a custody battle, and the district attorney of the county says he will not consider perjury no matter what proof you have. So how do you have truth? How do you have justice when they're not interested in truth?
May I respond to that? The question had to do with a district attorney saying that even though perjury might exist in a certain case, he's not going after it. He's not going to prosecute it.
Yeah.
And this is extremely frustrating because what does an oath mean and what is it worth in a court of law if in fact there's no penalty? All right, and this is a big, this happens to be true, I know in Baltimore County, Maryland, and also in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. I've been told the same kind, I've run exactly the same situation that you have. And I don't have a silver bullet answer to that, except to say that those people need to be, those people, like many other people in civil government, are unqualified to hold the office. Anybody that, by the way, that doesn't understand what I said about where law comes from, anybody who can't answer the question, what's the purpose of civil government, they're not qualified. And now, don't ever vote for them. And even if the other guy's worse, don't ever vote for them. You can't vote for the lesser of two evils. And I'm sure you've talked through this. If you vote for the lesser of two evils, then you get evil and you deserve it, don't you? Because you voted for it.
Well, the problem was we had 3 judges in Berks County, and I tried to speak to each one of those. The one person that's running for judge in Berks County is the one that denied, she was the first assistant district attorney. She officially denied it, over 150 counts of perjury and 100 counts of abuse of power by the judge in the case. And they would not read anything.
Right.
That's against the First Amendment. You have to have the right to get a grievance. They can say you don't have evidence, but they have to at least listen to you. I got thrown out of in January, I got thrown out of the DA's office in Berks County because they won't listen to my case. There's a guy in jail now for 4 years who tried to help my daughter, and that's why they got him in jail. Because he tried to help my daughter.
I'm so sorry. The preamble of the Constitution, thank you. The preamble of the Constitution says, one of the reasons is to establish justice. How do you establish justice? You punish injustice. That's what the Bible says.
Right.
You punish injustice. So if that's not being done, you have a lawless, godless system. Yes, sir. That's why we're teaching this on the Constitution.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a question. You said something about the incorporation of churches. I know we're going on a slightly different tangent here, but how about the incorporation of businesses?
The incorporation of businesses. Yeah, I wasn't speaking to the incorporation of businesses. I was talking about, see, what a business is doing also is walking down to the civil government and saying, and making a deal. Protect me from certain liabilities, give me certain franchises, etc. And I will give you certain loyalties. Excuse me. I think inherently it's an evil thing. I think that for the government to give these certain protections is unequal protection. So yeah, I was not speaking to that. I was speaking to this particular situation. A church certainly can't do it because it violates what a church is. Yes, sir. Randy.
Just to dovetail on what that gentleman was saying, and the ignorance of the Christian community as a whole, and then you have the problem of where the pastors are at. So you have a compounded problem of ignorance within the Christian community, and the ignorant pastors leading you off, and then you can't even find any. Now, the dovetail on that is this. What do you say about Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, and the rest of them that are also leading the people, I think,
Randy, come on
down
up here. Come on up here, please. I want to answer. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'll teach you, Randy.
I thought you were ready to comment. I didn't realize you weren't there yet, but I apologize. So finish your statement.
No.
What do you do about a Rush Limbaugh who does what?
That leads them down a criminal path. It leads them into the weeds and the swamp.
Here's you hold that because I think I'm on. Stay right here, Randy. Okay, and Pastor, I'm going to ask you to just move over to his right. To his right. Okay. Now, I talked about these standards. Stay right there, Randy. Here's the standards, right? Here's this standard and this standard, right? Now, in the face of these standards, I want you to consider Randy's going to be our liberal. This is not typecast. All right, now, I want you to stand right here. Now, look, all right, let's assume that right here in the center of the room is the biblical constitutional standard, right? Now, Randy is a Democrat, left-wing, he's on your left, right? He's a left-wing liberal, and he proposes, way out here, now remember, here's the standard. way out over here, he proposes this unconstitutional, unrighteous, ungodly health care plan, right? That's what he proposes. Now, I am the conservative Republican. Do I stand here and say, no, here's the standard over here, friend. What you're proposing over there is unconstitutional and ungodly, so it doesn't need to stand. So here's where I want you to be. Here's what I'm going to insist on this. No. Here's what I do. I propose this unconstitutional, ungodly health care plan that's just a little bit less draconian than his unconstitutional, ungodly health care plan. Now, what normally happens is, let me use the Hegelian dialectic language. Here's the thesis, here's the antithesis, and we come to some thesis here. Some synthesis. We come to some compromise here. Now, so this plan is adopted. Now, what does he do next? Go ahead and do it. He goes left. He proposes the next unconstitutional, right? And what do I do? And what does he do? And what do I do? And what does he do? And what do I do? Okay, now, do you notice that I'm now to the left of where he was? Remember, I'm the conservative Republican. Right wing, I'm right wing here. But you see what's happened? Okay, now, to get to your question, I'd tell you that to tell you this. Okay? Now, in my view, he's talking about Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, who else? Glenn Beck, Mark Levin, certainly these other two. What they do is get on the radio and talk about this argument right here, this fight. This is, and of course this is a false fight. They don't talk about, wait a minute guys, none of that's in Article 1, Section 8, none of that's allowed by God's law. That's all wrong. No, they keep you all feeling that you're represented because there's this big, Mark Levin is yelling into the microphone and bringing attention to this phony, fake fight over here. Right? Now, what does he do now? He goes further and Sean, and you might love Rush Limbaugh, but what Rush Limbaugh is doing is keeping the focus over here on this false fight, and meanwhile, this progressive agenda is progressing. And the answer is always, after we have to compromise to here, the answer is always, man, we only had 3 more Republican votes. If you could only elect 3 more, if you could only elect a Republican president again, we'd get a couple more Supreme Court guys in there. If you could only do that for us, then we're going to win the next one, which is like somewhere way past the parking lot. Okay? That's where this goes. Another just example of this, thank you very much. That's what I think of those guys. Another example of this, by the way, is thank you very much. Back in his day, we're right about at the 50th anniversary of the killing of the murder of John F. Kennedy, right? Back in his day, he would have been, where Pastor is here, he would have been considered a left-wing lunatic. I mean, he was a liberal, right? Today, his policies would be considered ultra-conservative because we're way over here now. We progress way over here, so we look back at Kennedy and we think, man, low inflation, man.
And the Fed.
And the Fed, right? He looks like a conservative. So what's changed? What's changed is our standard. That's why we need fixed standards. That's why I don't talk about conservative anymore. I think conservative is a mush word that leads us down that way. It's a mush word. We got to talk about biblical and constitutional. Is that response biblical? Is that response constitutional? Which is another way of saying, is that response American? Is that an American way of thinking? There's a God. Our rights come from Him. The purpose of civil government is to protect and secure God-given rights. Is that the American view? Which, by the way, is our website. So that's what I think of those. I think as a matter of fact, if they did what we would like them to do, stand over here, I think they'd be off the air.
Absolutely.
If their job, they're allowed on the air because they're keeping the attention.
Absolutely.
Would you Would you agree, Randy? One more question. Anything, anybody else, any other, or comment, if you have a comment. You think we're all right? Think we're all right? Yes, sir.
We talked about perceived laws, pretend laws, but they're still backed up with real guns, not pretend guns. And so, is education it?
No. Well,
That's where you start.
It-
Because if you
it's-
don't have the worldview, you don't have a place to stand to do battle.
right. To just blandly say, well, that's not real law, that's pretend legislation, that doesn't solve the problem, does it? Because there's still guys with guns and badges that are enforcing those. Well, here's one thing, just one thing you can take home with you. If you're ever on a jury, and by the way, we published another course of instruction on how to be a good juror. Stop avoiding jury duty. Learn what you're supposed to do, which is to defend the Constitution. Go do it. Okay, so we published a 6-lecture course in that. We don't have those with us tonight, but if you're interested, go to our website, theamericanview.com. But one thing you can learn, for example, you know, God gives us liberty of conscience. When I drive into the parking lot every day, there's a little garnet red Mustang that I covet. It's not mine. I'd like it to be mine. And I sin every morning when I drive in because I drive past it. To me, the original muscle car is the Mustang. I love it, a lot of other stuff, but the Mustang, and this really little garnet red Mustang is in the parking lot, right next to the FedEx machine. And I look at it. Now, government has no authority to punish me for my desiring that or even coveting that Mustang. If I stole it, now the civil government has jurisdiction. My point is that the civil government has no jurisdiction over my motives or my thoughts. That is communist. God gives me liberty of conscience. Now, God will punish me for coveting the Mustang. That's on the self wall. That's self-government. But it's not on the civil government wall. Okay? So, I'm saying all this to get back to your question. There's no such thing as a hate crime. Please repeat that after me. There's no such thing as a hate crime. Now, having said that, you and I know there is such thing as a hate crime, but only God can punish it. There's no such thing as a civil government hate crime. Please say it one more time. There's no such thing as a hate crime. You never remember anything else from Michael Peruka. He told you, and we agree, there's no such thing as a hate crime. Now, here's another thing we can do. If I'm on a jury, I'm not telling you how to vote on a jury, because that would be jury tampering, but I'm telling you about me. Okay? Well, it's not jury tampering, because you're not on a jury. But if I were ever on a jury and somebody was accused of a hate crime, I could never vote to convict that person because I know there's no such thing. Now, I also know a couple of other things because I've studied the Constitution. I know that our right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So if somebody's accused of some kind of gun control law and I'm on a jury, I don't care what I'm instructing. I've read the law. And I know that there's no, I know first of all there's no such thing as a hate crime. I also know that there's no such thing as some kind of reasonable gun control. If somebody's committed a crime with a gun, you can punish them for the crime, but you can't punish them for possessing something that they have every right under the Constitution and under God's law to possess. So here's one thing you can do. Resist by being on a jury and resisting. Using your authority, your vote, because you have a vote in the ballot box, but you have a vote in the petty jury box and the grand jury box if you're selected. Use those like an American. Use any influence you have over anybody who happens to be in law enforcement. If I'm a police officer and I'm instructed to take somebody's gun away, and I know that he's not committed a crime with it, who's my oath to? My commanding officer? No, my oath to the Constitution. My duty before God is to the Constitution. So in any job you have, in any venue, whatever your sphere of influence is, let's learn to live liberty. And let's act that way.
And convert those who have the guns. That is the most important person that you elect in any election in any 4 years is the sheriff of your county.
If you can elect a sheriff who holds the American view and understands, as Michael said, the two standards, God's law and the Constitution, and who will abide by that, you can protect in your county, not outside your county, but within your county, the borders of your county, you can protect those who abide by God's law and the Constitution. And some sheriffs are beginning to wake up. We're involved in teaching sheriffs all over the country. We have a kit back there that's a course we've done to train sheriffs and their deputies. And the other element you can do with your sheriff is volunteer to become part of his posse. And he can actually deputize you as part of his posse.
We're training a posse down in Sussex County,
Yes, in Delaware, where the sheriff is under supreme attack in the state of Delaware. But you can restore on a local level much easier than you can on state and obviously on federal level. But locally, we need to take back those local positions, and the sheriff, I would contend, is one of the most important positions you can restore.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you call a hate crime? Is it just a crime?
Yeah. Look, if I assault this gentleman, I bring some kind of violence against this gentleman, you can punish me for the violence that I committed to the gentleman. It's assault, it's battery. But you can't do it, you can't say that I did it to him because he has freckles and I hate freckles. It doesn't matter why I did it. It's that I did it. You can't punish my motive or increase my punishment because of my motive, and that's what they seek to do. See, because if I could sell you that, if I could sell you that I can increase my crime because I did it because of the color of his skin or how many freckles he has or whatever, and you can do that. Well, later on, all you need to do is to take away the act, and you can just punish me for wanting to do it, even without doing it. So it's a very, very dangerous thing. No, there's no such thing as punishing a motive. Now, motive is something that juries can consider. Don't get me wrong, juries can consider motive when they're trying to figure out, well, what motive did this guy have to do it? Do I believe that he did it or not? That's different. I'm talking about you can't give punishment because of motive. You give punishment. Civil government can punish your actions, but not your thoughts. You've been very, very gracious tonight. We've used up a lot of your time. Thank you so much for your invitation. God bless you. And please say, we're going to give away something. Can we do that real quick? We're going to give away a set of our merchandise. And here, come here.
While Michael's picking this.
This is Micah. Pick one of those out. Oh, and he didn't get the top one. He reached down in there.
What's it say, Micah? You're homeschooled. Come on.
Ryan Horse?
Ryan Horse.
Ryan Horse? There he is, right there.
Give that young man.
Now, Ryan just got our CD package that really culminates the message of the American View and the Institute on the Constitution. Those are half price tonight. See Mr. Neal at the back table there. He can get you those there. How much are those, Neal? $10? $20, half price. So you get a whole bunch of hours. Also, too, if you are interested in teaching this course, the United States Constitution, how many people have taught this in this room? Anybody? Anybody taught? How many people have taken the course so far? Okay, fantastic. It's an easygoing thing. You can start a group and we will help you engage in that. We also do webcasts, webinars, and we have on-site staff members that are ready to help you do just that. Or maybe even teach somebody in your community.